Earth Bill 1, stop our pollution. To my mind, we're dedicating our lives and sacrificing a lot for this movement and for this moment. And for me, that means I want to have an impact that is significant to the trajectory. I don't want to just organize in the normal course of business and join the stream and be part of that. We want to do something significant, and it's critical that we also set the standards in motion that are going to redirect the economy and stop our pollution. So this is no small feat, but it appeared to me that there were certain common elements from all the various proposals and the organizations and coalitions that we're connected to, and it was really about the mandates. So if you could go to the next slide. So the idea is a 2030 moonshot for Earth, to put mandates in a 2-page bill that would be 100% renewable energy by 2030, 100% zero emission vehicles by 2030, 100% zero emissions on cement and steel by 2030. And then we work to soak it all back up by 100% regenerative farming by Big Ag by 2030. Next slide. Here you can see the coalition alignment. The VICA document, which is US-CAN, has 100% renewables by zero emission vehicles. OFF-ACT, same thing. Some of them are 2030, some of them are 25, which is Food and Water Watch. The EDF letter that you're familiar with from Felice, zero emission transportation, 100% clean power by 2035. The Thrive bill, which we've seen a preview of, has goals in it too. They're not really mandates, but they're included in their spending bill proposal. 100% clean energy by 2035, 100% zero emissions by new vehicles by 2030. Next slide. The Clean Futures Act has these emission standards you just heard about, 80% by 2030, 100% by 2035. The House Climate Crisis Committee has 100% vehicles. World Resource Institute is talking about carbon standards for cement and steel. And then the Auto Association is even on board with 100% of electric vehicles by 2030. Next slide. Here you can see VICA listed in US-CAN. Over 195 organizations are part of that. We won't slide down, but if you look on your own version of the presentation, you could scroll down and they're all listed. Next slide. Same with the EDF sign-on letter, a whole bunch of organizations. Go ahead, next slide. The G&D table, which is working on the Thrive Act. You see those groups working on that, led by the Working Families Party. And there's a whole ground game associated with that bill. We won't go into that bill, but later we'll tell you more about it. We'll let them do their rollout. Go ahead, next slide. The Food and Water Watch bill was done with 400 groups and the OFF Act, and that list is there. Next slide. So you can see from those previous slides that if we have this common denominator of mandates, if we could get all of those groups and all those organizations backing a mandates bill, we would have a very powerful force pressing Congress to act. There's, of course, some key definitions that are important here. Clean energy, zero emissions, big agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Go ahead to the next slide. We're conducting input on all of that, as you probably have seen in various emails, and we invite more input. The various teams, electricity sectors looking at clean energy, will collect various definitions. This is the one from the OFF Act. Go ahead to the next one. Major agriculture, we're working on that definition. There's some references to the USDA. Go ahead, next slide. Regenerative agriculture, same thing. We're working on that. Emily and others are working on this. Next one. So the incentives enforcement strategy is important because everyone thinks we're trying to force our way into a budget reconciliation bill. So this hook is partly for that and partly because it's a good hook to attach it to tax deductions. And not just regular deductions, but all their ordinary and necessary business deductions. So that's your rent, all your employees, all your cost of doing business. We could double deductions up front or give credits even for transition costs if you want to make them loans. And then the important piece is to eliminate deductions, the ordinary business deductions for non-compliance. And no business can really survive without being allowed those deductions. And these are better than credits because credits can become a cost of doing business. You took the credits, you lost the credits, et cetera. But deductions, general business deductions, are a powerful, powerful piece of enforcement. Next slide. There's some draft mandate language. Just you can see how sort of straightforward it is to do this kind of thing. It could literally be a couple pages. I'm working on it. These pieces are pulled from the All Fossil Fuels Act. Next slide. So are you ready to get arrested? This is the question I always ask activists, you know, what's the demand that we're going to get arrested for? And so this is a clear demand for the activists, and it's a unifying demand for the movement. It's a real greenhouse gas reduction law that's measurable. It's a major market signal to implement private sector and action and government action. We can make this a positive message, the pollution solution, and talk about responsibility. It's our production, our consumption, and our pollution. And then set this collective mission as a positive thing, a 2030 moonshot for Earth. And so I think we could change this altogether. It would set more aggressive timelines, obviously, but you always let them negotiate. You start with your position and then, you know, let the other side push back. You don't start with concessions. And then you could actionize this very clearly. Electric consumers, we could have it all that people return their bills with big red marker on it, go clean. And we can make sure that all the city's street lights posts are charging outlets. And so there are ways to make this sort of a community lift. Next slide. And the real point is about building movement power. I mean, none of these issues, none of those bills that we're listing have enough power alone. So again, we have to unite across the sectors. The opposition is united. It's big ag, big oil, big pharma. So these mandates would really get at the heart of what they don't want to have happen. And since they control our Congress, these mandates would be their worst nightmare. And together we could call the question on who controls the power in Congress and retake our democracy. Next slide. This carbon clock I talked about in the beginning, but here you have it again. The timelines are just horrifying and the destruction has begun. And the administration wants to do this in a sort of a copacetic way of spending money. It's hard to get, you know, get people riled up against spending money on the right things. But go to the next slide. I just don't think that we have the kind of time to avoid putting these clear market signals in place. So a test of all of our action is what are the projected greenhouse gas reduction impacts of new laws? We need to know this about the Clean Futures Act. We should demand this of any bill that the administration is claiming is a climate bill. What is the timeline for those greenhouse gas reductions based on these new laws? Who is going to build the renewables, the government or the private sector? And what government agency is in charge of implementation and oversight? These are core questions we need to ask of everything. Next slide. So that's the proposal, Earth Bill 1, Stop Our Pollution. Come up with a 2-page bill that we can sell to activists. I think the direct action folks are going to be excited about this. They've been waiting for a demand. It would be something that we lead on instead of following. Everything else in the pipeline is us guessing at what's going on and following the administration somewhat blindly along, except for the Clean Futures Act, which is really clear now, actually. And it's showing what's missing. And I think these pieces are what's missing. And to the extent they're not missing, they're affirming of a lot of other ideas and commitments.